I'm with Chief David of the MCA here in St. Regis, Akwesasne. Chief, the chemical tanks in Cornwall, Akwesasne is now get involved, and I believe the MCA is now talking about getting lawyers involved and legaling up.
Yes, that's true, and I understand that there was a press release recently issued basically confirming that yes, we are going to be taking legal action on this. But it's not the legal action, I think, that is the kind of the driving force here. The driving force really is the concern for the environment. Mm-hmm. We're not bringing forward, putting our chips, our legal chips forward simply because there's a game here. The issue is the backgammon board itself. It's the environment. We have worked for years to, and as well as the Cornwall people, we have worked in cooperation for years to clean that river up. From 1958 to the present, from the time after the completion of the seaway projects and the adverse environmental impacts that seaway project had on the river system itself, we knew what that river was like before, the beauty of it. We've lost it. Well, what we're trying to do is to bring back whatever portions of that memory we can. Okay? Now, it's been difficult. We've gone through periods of industrialization, the regional industrialization of the area, the dumping of chemicals into the river, whole-scale dumping right into the river that we've had to deal with, that every stakeholder in the river system has had to deal with. It's not just Akwesasne. This is up and down the whole river system. We're finally at a point where we're saying, yeah, we think we got it. And most recently, by the way, you remember there was this whole thing about the Bruce plant and the transportation of radioactive waste. Mm-hmm. That was back maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. That was the most recent battle that we had. We took a very, very strong position on that. And we said, no, you're not transporting dangerous elements over the river system. And primarily, the reason behind that was because of the way that the river system has recovered, the investment that both of our communities have made into it, both in terms financially and in terms of human investment and emotional investment. We've got a huge investment in that river system.
No, we were talking before. How do you personally feel, and how did the council feel about finding out about this situation via the media and not being consulted by the federal government or the City of Cornwall until after the event had occurred?
Well, I was flabbergasted. But these days, you should come to expect the unexpected. Politics around here is notorious, but I was a bit taken back. I was a bit surprised to be informed by the media on what was happening on our doorsteps. I would have appreciated advanced information, either from the federal government, Transport Canada, or from Trillium.
Excuse me.
There have been other developments throughout the past couple of years, and I'm thinking more in the alternative energy sector. And these are provincially regulated, it's a provincially regulated area. But those companies regularly get a hold of us to say, look, we're thinking of building a solar plant out here, solar farm. Is there going to be a problem with it? And we usually talk a bit about archaeology and what we do with archaeological finds, and we'll make agreements of that nature. And a lot of these aren't even written agreements, they're just understandings.
Yeah, you guys had the Enbridge pipeline come through.
We had the Enbridge pipeline come through. I remember work that was being done in Toronto, clearly outside of our existing traditional territory. Out near Toronto, the company called us and said, you know what, we heard that this was Haudenosaunee at one time were up in this area. We are doing a major excavation here. It's a major development. We're going to be going down 60 feet and down to the rock bed. If we come across any skeletal remains, we don't know what to do with that, so we're calling you. Okay? So we made a very informal arrangement over the telephone. Now, we have that happening throughout the years, companies like that calling us up like this. And then all of a sudden, Trillium comes up, this Trillium issue. We didn't even receive a phone call.
And the timeline from Transport Canada was that the city of Cornwall knew in February of 2013, and that they were given the plans in April or June of 2013, and it only really went public in December of 2013 once construction was already started and the tanks are already in place. And Akwesasne didn't respond immediately. There was almost like a 3-week delay before Akwesasne officially spoke out. Why was there the delay?
Primarily because of the holidays. Okay, there was we had quite a few of our councillors that had opted out to take some holidays the week immediately prior to Christmas. Some were on travel, and that was one issue. The other issue was basically to examine the matter from, let's say, a more analytical perspective, from a more objective perspective, to say, okay, let's set the emotions aside. What actually is happening here? Where is our interest in it, and what do we need to do to ensure those interests are protected? But they're protected in a way that maintains the harmonious environment that we find ourselves in as neighbors between Akwesasne and Cornwall.
There are two other factors that have emanated from this. One, according to Mayor Kilger and some of the comments that have been made, it's federal lands. They don't have to abide by normal criteria, normal bylaw policy, normal environmental policy. Unofficially, we've heard from individuals in Environment Canada that are completely upset that no environmental studies have been done on these tanks coming in. There have been other comments that have been made that yes, tanks were there at one time, but the tanks were removed. So to put tanks in, you'd have to do new studies. What kind of concerns does this raise for you here in Akwesasne?
Well, I mean, logically, one would assume that if a project has been completed and it's been decommissioned, there's been a decommissioning of the prior project, that any new project would automatically trigger a requirement for environmental study. Why that didn't happen, don't know. If there isn't a requirement to do that, it may have to do with the last omnibus bill that made some massive amendments to the environmental laws in Canada. I don't know.
There's other
I don't know for sure.
Sorry to interrupt you there. There's some other concerns that if this is the way they're going to practice it, that there are a number of federally owned pieces of land, even under land claim, which we'll get to shortly. But for instance, the Air Force Wing is on federal land. There's other parcels of land that are under federal jurisdiction. Could they put in nuclear waste tanks? Can they just do whatever they want willy-nilly? It doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Well, that's kind of going way out. I mean, a nuclear power plant, I don't think would...
No, waste tanks, just storage.
Storage tanks.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't like to speculate too far into that. Is it possible? Is it possible that the Maple Leafs do the Stanley Cup this year?
That's not possible.
I don't know.
That's not happening. Other people in Cornwall have said that this particular parcel of land was offered not only to the city of Cornwall, but it was also offered in partnership with Akwesasne, and that Akwesasne refused. Is there any truth to that, to your knowledge?
Well, that's a little erroneous.
Mm-hmm.
In actual fact, I believe originally Cornwall was looking to have those lands devolved from the federal government to them. And then it became apparent there was a federal policy in place saying if there were First Nations in or around the vicinity, they also have an interest in it. Now, that turned into it created kind of like a wedge between the communities, because it was almost like there was a competition for the acquisition of the harbour itself. And we said, well, wait a minute now. After a couple of years of this competitiveness, we're really competitive, and we're not really focusing in on the harbour, the use of the harbour, and how a partnership could evolve and what that partnership might consist of.
Can you clarify what you mean by competitiveness?
Well, competitiveness. We would like the harbour. We would like control of the harbour. We would like absolute management of the harbour. And if Akwesasne is going to be involved, possibly there might be some room for usage. We said, That's not what the policy says, and that's clearly, that's not the intent of the policy, and that's not our vision.
This would be what year roughly?
This was roughly, I think Grand Chief Ray Mitchell was in at that time. So that had to be maybe about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the original discussions started up. I think there was a memorandum of agreement that was signed off at that time between Akwesasne and Cornwall. It goes back that far. The discussions went to a certain point, and then it fell. They discontinued.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it picked up again a second time, but it didn't really gain any traction. And from our side, personally myself, I've always been a proponent for finding a good, reasonable solution on a partnership on that harbor, on how we can use it. I mean, there's a lot of interest in Cornwall in tourism. There's a lot of interest on this side on tourism. That's off the table. I mean, that's good. So that's not an issue.
No.
The issue becomes commercial. How much, what's the definition? What do you mean by using the harbor commercially? I know that there's a desire to designate that harbor exclusively for recreational use. Well, we've got an expanded vision of that. We're thinking that maybe there's some use that it can be made for commercial purposes that kind of fit into some of our longer range economic plans.
Such as?
It could be something as an example, such as an agreement that we might have with the Huron for the transportation of lumber.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not actually involved in any industrial usage. It's just transporting lumber, unloading lumber, and transporting lumber from the harbor to Akwesasne.
Mm-hmm.
Something as simple as that. It could be transporting pre-assembled or unassembled parts from different parts of the world to an assembly plant in Akwesasne. It could be a number of things.
Can you help clarify, because there's a lot of confusion going on, there's this cloud of the land claim over this whole story, and I think some people are using it as an excuse. Some people are talking and not knowing what they're talking about. You know, as a chief here in Akwesasne, can you explain the connection of the land claim, the impact of it, the ramifications of it? And some people have said, why would you partner up in a property that you have a land claim on that you claim is yours?
You're asking for a long history here.
Maybe the Coles Notes version for like the dumb people, something they can just digest easily. The simple version.
Coles, not the Cliff?
Yeah, the Cliff Notes too.
And I don't, we've always, okay, you're not from here, mm-hmm. So you don't know the history of the area, okay? At the end of the American Revolution, there was a loyalist movement up north, up this way. They needed land, they were displaced out in the counties, okay? They came to us and they were asking for permission to use lands on the North Shore. Lands that we weren't using. We said, for what? They said, okay, we want to plant gardens. We want to do some farming. We'll section some off. Okay. An agreement was made at that point in time. They said, okay, you can use those lands. Okay. And after considerable thought and deliberation, you know, the message was this: you can use the land for your farming. But you can't stop us. If we need to go out and we want to do some hunting out there, you can't stop us from doing that. You're there to farm. That's your activity. We won't bother your farming. We won't bother your animals. That's you. You take whatever land you need, you use it. But you can't stop us from using the land, getting to the natural resource. If we need hickory, we're going to get the hickory. If we need craftwood, we're going to get the craftwood. If we decide that we're going to go out and winter out there, and there are families that historically used to winter out on the North Shore, in those North Shore lands, can't stop them from doing that. If there are families that go out to collect firewood, dead wood, they would pick that up. And they said, okay, what's the quid pro quo? The quid pro quo is this, is that at the end of the season, after you have taken all of your harvest, and after you have considered the surplus that you're going to need as insurance, just in the event it's a hard winter, okay? The surplus on top of that, you're going to take all of that, you're going to set it aside, you're going to put it in a sleigh, and you're going to bring that over at a designated time of the year. And it was around this time, actually, it was in January. We'll meet you in the middle of the river, and there'll be an exchange. And that could be the surplus from knitting, it could be sewn, it could be goods, as well as agricultural product. Okay? Whatever it is that you have that you don't need, you can bring it over, and that'll be the exchange. You know that practice that was made in the 1700s, the late 1700s. That didn't stop until 1949. Okay. Now, in order to fully explain this, you have to examine the principle behind it. The people looked at the St. Lawrence Valley as a basket of resource, and they said, it's here, nobody really owns it. We can coexist. And that's what we have, our protocols of coexistence. Not domination, not whose law dominates what. It's coexistence, okay? What happened over the years is that Canada came in with its Indian Act, lands were taken away, people were given, crown patents, titles to the lands, okay? We're coming back now and we're saying, wait a minute now, you had no right to issue those crown patents because you didn't own the land. How did the crown get the land?
Well, the original lands that you did let them use, was that the original square mile of Cornwall? Were there any boundaries to those lands?
There were boundaries. I remember seeing maps to the original boundaries for the city of Cornwall, and it's pretty well described. It's described by the existing streets.
So it's the square mile.
It's a square mile.
Yeah.
It doesn't include the waterfront. In our oral tradition, our oral history, our older people have said we always reserved that waterfront. And it made a lot of sense because we used to trap. Okay, we wanted that waterfront and free usage. We needed free usage of that waterfront to park our boats. Okay, we didn't say that people on the North Shore couldn't use it. Okay, it was the opposite. People on the North Shore weren't prime users of the river system. They were farmers. By definition, that's what they said they were going to do. They were going to farm, they were going to raise cattle. We were the ones that were the hunters, the trappers. So we needed access to the North Shore. So that whole area, all along the river system, okay, was designated, was set aside, always understood to be part of Akwesasne, okay, not to be surrendered, not to be.
So 200 years later, how come there are still land claims? How come this has never gone before the courts? How come this has never been resolved? I mean, a lot of people ask that question. I'm not trying to be pointed or anything. it's a simple layperson question that people ask all the time.
And it's a fair question because it's only up until, I don't know, about the mid-1950s where it was legal for bands to engage their own legal counsel. Prior to the 1950s, it was illegal for an Indian community to hire their own lawyers. I mean, it was against Canadian law. You couldn't do it. We couldn't do that. So there was a lot of education that had to occur. And as communities started to develop, we quickly realized that there were many, many unresolved land issues. And that's the way I'm tending to look at it. Land claim is a Canadian term that's used in Canadian policy. What we have here, our perspective, we are looking at this more generally as unresolved land issues. There are people there that we're not entirely certain they know of the protocols. We're not entirely sure that there's a respect for the understandings that were there. So, how does this end up in the land claim? The land claim is just one avenue that we have. There's a land claim policy the federal government has. They announced it a couple of years back. They're going to deal with land claims. We call them land grievances or land issues. They call them land claims. And there are certain criteria that have to be met. We've decided to go down that avenue. It was a decision made by the Council of the Avenue, and to do the research and to see if we can meet that criteria and if we can accomplish what we're looking to accomplish in that venue. Remember, even though the federal government may have accepted a claim, that claim still has to be ratified by the people ultimately. It's not something the Mohawk Council can develop in a back room, take to the government and say, here. We've got to take that back out to our community constituents to say, this is the deal right here. And this is the only deal, the best deal that we could make within that forum called a land claim process.
Similar to this one right here?
Is this good enough? And if the people say no, it's not going to go. Then we have to look for a different forum. What's the other venue? Is it a Canadian court? Is it a politically negotiated process? I don't know.
Now, a lot of people have said to me, and I just want to ask this to confirm it, that according to the federal government in Canada for land claims, they will not give you land, they can only give you money. Is that correct?
Partially true. Partially true. I'm not entirely sure that that's actually entirely true. And I say partially true because we haven't gotten to that point where if it were a make or break, could a deal be negotiated where some of that land could be returned back? And I can see where models could be developed where it could. Lands that aren't being used on the North Shore, okay, could those be purchased and a land assembly made and a deal said, okay, well, you say you need an additional 3,000 acres. Okay, we will plan with the people on the North Shore to make that land available, okay, and that'll offset, it'll meet that criteria that you need more land for land expansion. That is possible. Now, this is, you have to understand we're just doing scenarios here.
Mm-hmm.
The federal approach is simply to provide money to say, okay, well, here is the money you need. It's a free market. Lands become available. You can go out and purchase if it happens to be close to a reserve. There's, in addition to reserve policy that can't kick in, we don't like the checkerboard reserves, so it becomes very, very administrative and very pocketed. But I don't know. I think that there is enough flexibility to negotiate. It all depends on, what's at stake. This claim we're talking about is a fairly big claim.
Do you know roughly the dimensions or the boundaries of the claim? Does it go as far as Brockville?
No.
Okay.
Not the North Shore claim, not this particular claim that's been submitted. There are a number of other claims coming up.
Is the original square mile of Cornwall excluded from the claim?
I don't know. I would have to, I'm not that versed on it. I would have to sit down with our technicians to see.
So what happens
I haven't seen the submission, by the way.
Going back to what's happening at the waterfront in Cornwall and the chemical tanks, what happens if legal remedies aren't successful? I know some people in Cornwall are talking about if they start construction again, blocking the tanks and access to the tanks. The city's passed a very weak bylaw. A lot of people just don't want these tanks in there. Would Akwesasne or the MCA participate in further actions to demonstrate or to make it loud and clear that no one wants the tanks?
I can't make that kind of a commitment to a strategy that we haven't really discussed yet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all we've really decided at this point is that we're opposed to it. And I think our reaction, just to demonstrate how opposed we are, is that we're prepared to take legal action.
Mm-hmm.
And we've authorized the conduct of a judicial examination, a judicial review of this. And then Cornwall has the opportunity, if it wishes, to intervene. Is that the correct term? To collaborate as interveners in support of the action. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens beyond that? It hasn't really been discussed.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll be updating the story as more news becomes available, and I think that's what we're all missing, is we're not being told everything. Even CFN, we're partnering with a group to have to file a series of Freedom of Information requests just to get basic information and to demand access to documents that have been going back and forth between Trillium, the city, and Transport Canada.
Yeah, and again, you have to appreciate, we were just informed of this, 2 weeks ago? And we're trying to be as open and honest as we can about it. But there's only so much that we can say at this point because we really haven't, we've only made the one major decision that we are opposed to it. And it's very clear in our press releases. Beyond that, we're going to begin mapping out what happens if scenarios. And
Did you have a lot of public complaints come in about the tanks from residents of Akwesasne?
I hadn't, but we hadn't really had like too many social gatherings. There's a massive social gathering right now, and that's another reason why it's difficult to get things going. This is the time of the New Year for the traditional people. So they're having their traditional New Year week, and it's a week of festivity and ceremony. So a lot of our people are over at the longhouses, and they're carrying on the annual traditions. A lot of our chiefs are over there. Our Grand Chief is a faith keeper. He's over there. So much of the discussion that needs to happen can't happen until after our traditional customary holidays.
All right. Well, thank you for taking time from your holidays, and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much for coming over. And
What's the Mohawk term for the holiday and for the greeting?
Osalase.
One more?
Osalase.
Osalaze. How'd I do on that one?
Oh, you did good.
Okay. Osalaze. All right. Thank you, Chief David.
Thank you very much.